All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out this week. This week I welcome Phil Battle and Aaron Hart. As we get going, guys, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, and just kind of talk about what you do for your churches and where you guys are at in the midst of your first pandemic. Phil, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. What's up, guys? My name's Phil Bowdle, creative arts pastor at Westridge Church. Also do some writing and speaking, consulting stuff just to keep me busy too, for sure. So yeah, it's been a very interesting season. We were all in. I know we were talking earlier about how Carl's a pandemic expert, so he really knows all the answers on this. No, reality is none of us have all the answers right now, but excited for this conversation, for you guys being with you guys and just leaning into stuff, learning from each other, and hopefully we can share some things that will help some churches today.
Yeah, and I'm Aaron Hart. I'm the communications director here at City View Bible Church in Round Rock, and I'm super excited to be a part of this conversation.
Well, Phil, as we get going, even though my expert self is here, I would love to know kind of a temperature check of Westridge. Give us kind of where you guys are. You were saying that you're having your first kind of staff meeting tomorrow, right?
Yeah, yesterday was week 10 for us of an online only type of gathering, which is unreal. In some ways, it feels like it's gone really fast. In other ways, it just feels like we've been in this season forever, And so, yeah, I think the thing that's on our heart right now is Galatians 6:9. It's let's not become weary in doing good, and then at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. And right now, we're just trying to not give up. We're trying to stay hungry in every day, every season that we're in, just to make the most of it. So right now, that's online gatherings only. And we're just trying to every day, whether it's on social media or our services or everything, just put Jesus on display with everything that we're doing. So we're seeing in some ways, we're seeing our most fruitful ministry happening right now. We're seeing God show up in ways that we never would have picked, but also we're celebrating of how he's moving in ways that he's never moved before in our community and really all across the country and beyond. So I know a question that I'm asking myself a lot as a leader and even putting this in front of our team is for this season that we're in right now, just asking the question 2 years from now, what do we wish that we would have done right now? What are the things that 2 years from now we'll look back and say, I'm so glad that we leaned into this process, this system, this investing in this, whatever, and that's helping us get a little bit of perspective and vision for the future. And leaning into taking advantage of this time that we've got where we might, we don't necessarily have more margin, but the time that we are using right now looks different than it would if we were still putting together services in the traditional way. So a lot of exciting stuff, but it is easy to grow weary when we're all zoomed out, when we're tired, when we've had a lot on our shoulders. But again, we're just seeing God move in some really powerful ways.
You mentioned investment. I'd love to just kind of throw this to the group. Have you guys spent more money on whether you're buying a streaming provider service or more gear, more equipment? You might want to speak to, we've invested more in this season. How does that, Dan, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we were already streaming online, so we had the equipment. I would say that we've definitely invested more time, energy, and evaluation on it. But as far as the financial side of it, I don't know that we've necessarily. But part of that's because we were already streaming online. It's just so much better now.
Because you're taking more time crafting your experience?
I can't tell you the number of conversations that we had in the past, about our online streaming platform and our online service. We would not discuss it at all. It was just something that was kind of happening, but we never really talked about it. Now, our primary audio technician is now our streaming technician, and probably will stay there. So we're trying to train some more people for the room so that we can keep our our A game on streaming when we go back live.
Right. We're writing a book right now. We just kind of are putting it together, and it's getting designed. And that's one thing that we talk about a lot. And we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But I'd love to dive into it a little bit. That is there a need to craft? Well, there is a need. I'm kind of pitching my opinion of we need to craft the online experience for the online audience. An online campus is not a camera in the back of the room just showing what's on stage. You know, I think one thing that this whole season has taught us is to pour energy into the online experience, that it's worth it to pour time and energy into it. Aaron, this might be a good point to bring you in. You guys have really done a great job of crafting an online experience. Do you want to speak to that and kind of where your church is?
Yeah, so I mean, we're still figuring out too. So I don't want it to sound like we've got everything figured out, which we completely don't. But yeah, man, we've just put a big emphasis on excellence, and so like just taking the time. Like we were live streaming before, but it was kind of like a afterthought. We had like it was multi-camera kind of stuff, and we had someone doing mix, but it really was kind of afterthought. So just this whole entire season is kind of like we've kind of made a shift of like putting the excellence, like what we would normally do in the room, like putting that online for our people. But yeah, I don't know if there's like anything specific I could share that we're doing that's different. So
Yeah, I want to get into we'll dive into it a little bit later, but I want to get into kind of the specifics of some things that you guys have done.
for sure.
But let me jump to this real quick. Phil, let's talk communications strategy. Is there what should churches be thinking of in terms of forming a communication strategy for welcoming their congregation back? I know I've heard some people, which I've probably adopted this too, of not using the term reopen because we never really closed, but more like a welcoming back type language. Do you want to speak to
Yeah.
that at all?
Yeah, sure. I think so much of thinking about reopening or whatever you want to call it, we got to remember as we communicate, we're not communicating and broadcasting from like how we feel and what we're excited about. We're communicating to the person that we're trying to reach. And so what we need to know about the people we're speaking to right now is 24/7 for the most part. People are really tired. Um, for the most part, people are very divided. Everybody has different thoughts about and emotions about reopening the states that they're in, the areas they're in. Some people are excited and ready to go. Some people are really anxious. So there's a whole range of emotions there. And even, unfortunately, a lot of decisions that churches or anybody is making are being politicized and they're being racialized. Like there's things that have big implications that we may never mean to have, but that's what people are associating with. So I think just a couple of values that are important for the church is to make sure as you communicate, just like you said, that you're not communicating that the church is back open, because the church is never closed. The church has actually never been more alive than it's been in this last pandemic season, because we're seeing God show up in huge ways, but it is again in a different model. So we need to be careful that we don't unintentionally speak to what people just experience as not being the church. And we also need to lead with authenticity. People know that nobody has it figured out, and people don't expect that except when you communicate in a way like you got it figured out. So especially for senior leaders that are communicating, to just speak from their heart, to say, look, here's what's going on, here's what we're at. But I think the third thing is just making sure that we're valuing the safety and protection of the people that we get to shepherd. And sometimes that means making the hard call of saying, we can't wait to be back together, but not yet, and here's why, here's what we're doing. So if you don't lead in a way to say that your safety and protection of your kids and your family is number one for us as we make these decisions, then they may not have the trust in you when they do step through your doors, because they're taking a risk every time they're doing that. So, for us, what we're trying to do at Westridge as we navigate that communication strategy is we're just being honest about where we're at. And we're not trying to say like we have the answers, because everything could change in 2 weeks. It really could. But what we have said for a way to help communicate to our church is we're saying we want to open the building back up and open our physical gatherings back up when we can safely gather families together. That way we're not putting families in a hard decision where they're saying, hey, we can go as adults, but we can't put our kids back in here, or in their environment, or, you know, at this, I can go, but my parents can't go because they're too old and all that stuff. So we just want to communicate for us. Church is alive, it's thriving. Continue to gather with us online. And when we can get back together as the whole church family, we're going to do that and celebrate that moment in a big way.
Is there something you mentioned, language, maybe the language that we use on social, or that there's a divide there. Is there specific things that we should not say? Like, obviously, maybe not get too political or too, you know, how can we prevent an unintentional divide in our language? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think for us, it's just trying not to, probably saying less. Like, don't try to say too much, because it can that's where people can read into you saying something that you're not. But if you can just keep it simple into, here's our values for you, here's your values that you need to know, then at least they may not agree with you. And the reality is, most people, there's a lot of people that will not agree with whatever decision you make. It's no different now than it was when the buildings open, and if you went around and asked everybody, hey, what volume should we have on a Sunday morning? Nobody's going to agree, and that's just the reality of it. But if we can just keep our values in front of people, they may not agree with you, but they hopefully will respect where you're coming from. And, you know, for our pastor, he's just speaking to saying, look, the reality is, for us as a big church, we have a big responsibility for our community to take care of them, and to know that if we gather 2,000 people in here, we have to do that wisely, and we got to do that watching out for you and your families. And so, again, if people may not agree with it, but hopefully they can respect that, to know that you're speaking to your values on this. But if you get too detailed into, hey, the Curve is doing this in our community, and here's what, like, everybody knows that that's so subjective, and it makes it something, an argument that you really don't need to be arguing at that point.
Good. Sam, speak to you guys' communication strategy at your church, or any questions that you might have where you are.
We do not have anything because we are in a closed communication strategy. We do not have any socials up and running. As of now, we communicate to our congregation only through our church application push notification, and that's it. And we have some WhatsApp broadcast or WhatsApp group that we communicate to our church, as we do not have anything public that we are on a social media as of now.
Gotcha. DeAndre, what about you guys? You want to speak to that?
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is, I shared last week here in Phoenix, a lot of the larger churches of our size, we're going back together. And so our first strategy was we crafted a video that just communicates that people find hope. Most people find hope in their faith. And so that publication went out last week, just saying, just sharing how we're doing church now, that you don't have to wait until the doors are actually open, because the church has never been closed, that you can still gather with a local church just online. But our other ways of communicating internally has just been a lot through, we do email notifications through our MailChimp, just communicating. We just pushed one last Friday, just telling people where we're at. Just had a brief video from our pastor just saying, this is what we know. We're not ready to go back yet. And when we go back, we, just like he communicated, we want to make sure that we've thought through what's best for us as a whole, and that we're caring for people and not just going back without thinking through what that process looks like. So people have been very responsive. I do agree that less is less is better. When you start trying to talk about curves, we start getting a lot of questions. And I just was reminding our executive pastor, we're not the expert in this topic. And so let's not try to act like we are the expert. Let's just take what we know and be very concise with what we're saying. But it's tended to work for us, just communicating less and like that authentic part that, hey, we're excited to get back together, but we do want to do that safely as possible.
Aaron, speak to maybe frequency of communication during the week. How much is too much communicating to my church?
Yeah, so we traditionally have tried not to send out everyone gets emails all the time. So we've tried to stay before all this, we were like 2 emails every single week, one on Monday, recapping Sunday, and then one on Friday, kind of going over what's happening on the weekend. But throughout this whole entire pandemic season, we've actually kind of cut that back, and we're doing maybe 1 email a week, just maybe giving a slight update or saying, hey, here's some opportunities where you can serve. We've been doing blood drives, and we've also partnered with a bigger church in town that's helping box food to give out to people, and they're also sewing masks. And so we're just trying to give an outlet for our people to get involved and serve. So I think I agree, kind of not going too much, not speaking over, we're not the experts. I 100% agree with that and feel that, but trying to say, hey, here's a place to serve. Like here's some stuff that you can do while we're kind of in this season.
Phil, I've heard you talk about obviously your kind of mission at West Ridge from your team is to put Jesus on display. So speak to that and maybe some of the hope over fear kind of language that you guys have really pushed on social and on all your
Yeah,
platforms.
sure. I mean, I think like we've talked about, this is a divided, hard time for people, and everybody's got a lot of ranges of emotion. And I'll tell you, this is also an opportunity for the church to actually be known for what you want to be known for. And so for us at Westridge, obviously our mission of how we accomplish our mission is just by trying to put Jesus on display with every post, every story, everything we're doing. We're not trying to put anybody in the spotlight other than Jesus. And so we don't want to put too much of the spotlight on us because that's not what we're here for. But when it comes to letting hope be louder than fear, I mean, the more that we're pointing to Jesus, so much of that naturally happens. But the ways that we're trying to show that in action as a church is one, just we want to make sure our church knows at each individual person that we actually genuinely care about them. Like not just what they can do for us, but we actually want to connect with them. We want to relate to them. We want to know that we have your back. And so one of the things that we did and we've just seen huge fruit from, is we actually called every person in our database, like every single person, and asked 2 questions: how are you doing, and how can we pray for you? And we just saw God use those conversations and phone calls and text messages at some points just to lead to some really awesome moments where people were feeling anything but hope in that moment, and God showed up at just the right time. So I think creating as many one-to-one experiences for our team, whether when we have opportunities to do that on a direct message on Facebook or Instagram, or when we get to answer an email or reply to a comment, we want to see the person behind the screen. We want to see them and care for them and love on them as best we can, because they matter, and you never know what that person's going through. And we can get lost in that when we don't see a face sometimes behind it. So that's one piece. We're also really trying to be intentional as a church of creating a posture of generosity. At a time when a lot of people are fearful of their finances, fearful of the unknown, we want our church to be known as a generous church because God's been so generous to us. So whether we have it or we don't, we want to make sure that we're communicating a posture of generosity, and that's changing a lot of the stories that we're sharing. This last week, we got to share a story of somebody that got a new work vehicle, and they didn't have a need for the car that they had just purchased, so they gave it to the church to say, "Hey, we trust you to know a family that needs this." And we got to share that story. We got to share stories of supporting the hospital workers that are going on, stories of supporting church planners that are struggling right now and don't have resources, maybe that didn't have online giving at all, and they're struggling and fearful right now. So any opportunity like that we can to help tell one little story that tells the global story of what's going on, we're just seeing huge fruit from, because it is showing that hope is louder than fear, even when things are crazy, when things are scary. There's a Jesus still on the throne, all of it, on all of it. So any chances we can do that through any platform we've got, that's our mission.
Are there anybody in this group that is really struggling with something? You're fearful of your church's finances, or you don't know how to do X, Y, or Z that you want to share? Chris, how about you guys? What is the kind of your communication strategy, or what are people feeling your way?
I think we put out a survey a couple weeks ago about people's thoughts and feelings on reopening. And what we discovered was there's a lot of differing opinions out there right now. And so we just last night had a family meeting on Zoom and announced our plans, and kind of similar to what Phil was sharing. We're staying online only right now, and we're not moving to physical Sundays until we can operate at 50% capacity. And so thankfully, I think our church is very unified, even if there is disagreement. And so that's one of the things we talked about as a team, is like we have the trust of our church family, which is huge. As far as communication strategies, I mean, the biggest thing for us is we're kind of the opposite of what somebody was sharing. Like before this all started, we were sending an email every other week. And one was more information based, one was more like encouragement, devotional, story based. And we've actually been sending out one every week now with ongoing updates and stuff as things change. And so that, and, you know, I love what Phil was saying, like stories speak, right? And so we're trying to tell stories. And one of the coolest things for us is we got to, in between our two gatherings that we do online, back at the beginning of the month, we were able to do a live baptism with a few people in our building, and somebody just live streamed it from their phone in between the two gatherings. And that's been an opportunity for us to show that hope, right, that Phil's talking about, that in the midst of all of this fear and anxiety and unknown, God's still working, God's still moving. And so that's been a huge opportunity for us to share that story and show people, like, look, this time might be tough, but God's still moving. He's still on his throne. He's still changing lives.
Yeah. Aaron, I'd love to kind of get into what we were talking about earlier, how you guys have really been intentional about crafting your online experience. Why don't you get in, and we did a podcast together, and that came out today. Steve, you might grab a link for it if you want, so we can put it in the chat, that we really dive in deep on what you guys did at City View. But I'd love to maybe talk about an overview of maybe like your Sunday online page and different things that you guys have been intentional on about crafting your online experience.
Yeah, the Sunday online page has been huge for us. Like I mentioned before, like we were streaming before all this, and it just kind of was an afterthought. But probably like 3 weeks into doing this, we realized that we were putting like 30 links in the chat, like go here for giving, go here for sermon notes, go here for all the things. And so we just decided, like, hey, let's just create one page where everyone can go, and every single week you'll have sermon notes, you'll have giving link. We started doing like a connect card also, so like people are filling that out, letting us know how we can be praying for them, and how many people are watching with them, so we can kind of get some of that data, and not just rely on Facebook and all that kind of stuff, all the analytics from there. But yeah, so that's been really helpful for us and our people, just knowing like this is where I go for all the things I need for Sunday. So I think that's been really good. But then also like just I mean, I think too, like just, I think someone mentioned it before, but being authentic also has been really good, which our senior pastor doesn't have any issue with that. Like he's been very open in his sermons the last few weeks of like, he's really struggling with, preaching to a camera instead of an audience. And so I think authenticity is so important right now, because I mean, he's struggling, we're struggling, everyone's struggling. So I think sharing that has been good too.
I see Sandra in the chat, and I'll go pull the link right now. But why don't you talk through what all is on that page, just so people have an
Yeah,
idea of.
yeah. Let me pull it up so I don't tell you wrong.
Yeah, you can even share it if you want, and walk people through it real quick if you want.
Yeah, yeah.
You guys have done a really good job about putting everything in one place. For like, you've done a like the first thing that comes up is a place, like a welcome video. You want to talk through that and kind of
Yeah.
first
Can
couple.
y'all see that? I don't know if it's on the screen yet. Yeah, sure. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. I guess y'all can see that. Yeah. So we have this video from our associate pastor, just real quick, talking about, hey, this is what you'll find on this page, and you're kind of just sharing his heart and giving a kind of feel for who we are. But then we also have our links to for where you can watch. So this will take you to the Church Online platform, our Facebook page, and then YouTube. And then this past week, we recognized all of our seniors, and normally we would do like a printable handout with each individual senior. And so instead of doing a printable deal, we just said, hey, we'll do it, and then set it up online. But then we also did a senior kind of video recap, where it's like each senior talks for 15 seconds and says, hey, this is what my plans are, and this is the high school I graduated from. And so that's really cool. People have really enjoyed that. But yeah, then we have our Connect card, which has been so helpful. People filling those out, and like that's a great place for prayer requests and all that. So you're not having to do two different forms; it's all the same form. Let's see. Yeah, then we got sermon notes, and we got digital sermon notes, Subsplash, so people can like fill it out on their phone or whatever. But then we also have printable notes too, so it's a PDF that you can print out and have spaces for you to write in kind of your notes. And then our kids activity page is awesome. Every single Sunday we have a what we call a super short Bible story with our kids pastor. And so he'll take time, probably about like 4 minutes in the whole entire service, and do a fun and engaging kind of Bible story for the kids. But it's been really funny. Like people have actually, adults apparently, like run to the room whenever they hear the theme song. And so the adults have kind of picked up on it too and enjoy it. It's always fun. Like we've smashed watermelons. We've done like tons of slow-mo stuff, just anything to kind of grab people's attention. And then our last thing is just kind of our giving page. So these are all kind of links that bounce out to different places. So
Does anybody have any questions on that for Aaron, or maybe ideas that you guys have tried? Phil, how does this relate to what you guys have done at Westridge?
Yeah, we've put together this week Westridge page, largely to even just kind of compile that one-stop shop for everybody, so that everybody can see everything they need to know for this week. And largely what we've seen the most fruit of that is for putting kids ministry and student ministry experience stuff in front of people. So that's been really helpful as well. But I love what I'm seeing there from what you're doing there, Aaron. Great job.
Yeah. Aaron, why don't you talk about how you guys have pre-recorded your services, and do you guys record in bulk? Answer that for me.
Yeah, so we've tried it a few different ways, and kind of where we've landed now is we were recording two services. Actually, when we recorded the podcast, we were doing two worship sets at the same time. But now we've kind of backed that down to where we're a week ahead on the worship set. So that's given us a little bit more time and not having to stress out so much to get 2 weeks of worship sets, music learned, lyrics ready, all that kind of stuff. So we're kind of week to week, and we've also tried like several different things. Like we tried to record a full service one time, like no cuts, the whole entire thing. And the issue was that we watching it back, it just didn't feel authentic. Like in the room when people are there and there's transitions happening and lights changing and all that kind of stuff. Like it feels real, but on video, it did not translate. And so like, we're still learning and trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And that just didn't work for us. So yeah, we're doing sermons every week and intro, outro every single week. But worships we're kind of a week ahead on. So
it's been better to pre-record in segments and then edit it all together.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, Phil, let's kind of move on to a topic of basically that online is here to stay. And one thing that I'm seeing, and we touched on it earlier on, is maybe senior leadership seeing the need that there needs to be energy into the online experience as well as the in-person gathering. So do you want to speak to that? Do you think that more senior pastors are realizing that, or more churches are realizing, hey, we need to minister to both and craft experiences for both audiences?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think pastors are more invested into it for a couple of reasons. One, every pastor in the last couple of months has become an online pastor, whether they were equipped to do it, whether they signed up for it or not. For the most part, that's the way that they were able to connect with the church. And so the other thing I know about most senior pastors, being an Enneagram fan like I am, a lot of Enneagram 3s out there in the senior pastor role, and they love, like, often they love stats and love knowing how their church is doing. And all of a sudden you get a really cool glimpse of what the church is doing by the stats and things that you can find out by an online only type of gathering. So I think for the most part, a lot of churches a lot of communication and creative leaders are realizing this is the time. Like, this is the time to step up and lead and help equip senior leaders with information and stories and stats that will help them catch a glimpse of what it could be into the future. Because I would say online church is here to stay, whether a church is invested in it or not, because all of a sudden everybody for the most part can connect with churches regardless of where they are at home, and that's not going to just all of a sudden go away. They know that it's here, and they know it's here to stay. So as a church, I think we need to know it's here and it's here to stay. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to say that it's online only, but I think what we have to be doing in churches is helping use online as a starting point or as a connecting point. A lot of people are going to connect with you online first before they ever step into the doors of your church. It was like that before, it's like that now, and it's going to be more like that in the future. The challenge is a lot of churches didn't know that, or they weren't operating that way, and they weren't positioning themselves well online, so they weren't ever seeing those people show up. But that's going to be here to stay. So, for some things that we're doing as a staff and as a team, and literally probably spent an hour and a half with my team this morning of just looking at the numbers, because for senior leaders, for us as creatives, we have, like, what a gift we have right now to have all the stats, all the analytics at our fingertips to know who we're reaching, how we're reaching them, what their attention span is, all that stuff. And so all those things we can use to be more effective into the future, because what you can't measure in a physical only gathering is you can't measure how many people are paying attention to your 35-minute sermon when their butts are in the seats. It can make you feel good because it's a full room or whatever, but that doesn't mean that you're actually accomplishing your mission. When I'm looking at our stats, I want to be looking at what was our target, what was our next step, how many people actually clicked on that link, how many people signed up, how many engaged, what's our average watch time? Are we seeing that continue to go up? Are we seeing that going down? How does that compare? So there's so much data out there that if we as creative leaders can lead instead of just waiting for people to give stuff to us, we actually need to take this information and say, hey, here's what we know based off of this data. Here's who we're reaching. Here's how we can reach them more effectively. So that's impacting for us, even things like, how do we get more effective with our first 15 to 30 seconds of a broadcast? Because the average watch time is 15 to 30 seconds. So how do we get more effective to help speak to the felt needs of that person when they're watching? Because that's our only moment, how do we be effective of showing stories and keeping people guessing in our broadcast so that it's not a formulaic type of thing. So all that said, I think church leaders need to know, church online is here to stay. But I would say even more important, creative leaders need to step up and lead in this time, because most creative leaders have the tools and the resources and the lens to be able to see things that a senior leader may not be able to see. But it's going to take us all partnering together more than ever before to lead and be ready for where the church is going now and into the future.
So I was asking a general question, but really my purpose was to ding Dan. That was what I was going for. Seriously, Dan, how does this hit senior pastors? You want to speak to that?
Well, since I am one, I appreciate the dinging. No, it is a challenge, and I do think that senior pastors have a tendency to focus on the room and the people that are there. Senior pastors are naturally relational, are naturally, I think most people that speak to a large group, they get a lot of energy out of the interaction that's in the room. And speaking to a camera and speaking to an online audience, you don't necessarily get that. We have been fortunate in our church in that we're doing the simulated live, and so I am grateful that I get to sit and watch Facebook chat and our church online chat. I get to see kind of the way that people are interacting, and it's been interesting to me because I try to be intentional because of the situation that we're in. I try to be intentional about saying, in the comments, do this, and why don't you write that? And here's something you can share. It's been interesting to see what things kind of spark somebody's willingness to interact. A couple of weeks ago, I had a question, and I right off the top of my head, I can't remember what it was, but I had a question very, very early in the sermon. They were still talking about it at the end of the sermon. At some point, I wanted to get on there and say, hey, there's more content. Stop talking. But it was good that they were interacting, honestly.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we have to do, and just speaking to a bunch of guys that are creatives and technical, I think one of the things, I love the idea of analytics and statistics, because you're exactly right. That communicates to the heart of senior pastors. They want to know how effective they are. We took the information that was shared in this group a few weeks ago and started applying it, not necessarily for how many people are watching, but a comparison from week to week on how many people are kind of what is our trend. And that's been very helpful. So using that, I think does kind of raise the flag for a senior pastor. But also just creating that team mindset of saying, hey, I want to be a part of your world. Will you be a part of my world? Can we actually interact together? I think that's the main thing, not just saying, hey, let me tell you what I think needs to be done for this online campus, but how can you communicate to me? Can we work together and creating that team? And then the other side of that I think is a challenge as we move forward is, while we want to make sure that our online experience is solid, we also want to be sure that there's some level of consistency between our live experience and our online experience. If it's a completely different environment,
right,
and they say, and that front door is the online experience, and it's a completely different environment, they're going to show up to the church and go, I don't know where I am. I don't, where's the guy that I keep seeing, where they're just, there could be a level of confusion. And so I think creating a level of consistency between the online experience and the live experience, I think is vital too, as well as paying attention to that online opportunity.
Aaron, what did you guys do before Corona, and maybe what are you doing moving forward? Does it look the same online as you did before, or are you changing some things?
Yeah, so we're I didn't chime in when we were talking about it, but we're in the process of doing some upgrades. Our camera, our building was kind of built with a camera platform. It's kind of far out on the side, so no head-on shots. So we're kind of in the process of building a center camera platform and then upgrading the cameras and stuff like that. And then also focusing a lot on the audio. I think our video before was really good, but having having so currently we're having someone like, actually we're paying someone to do the mix down, and hearing that compared to what we were doing is just night and day. So we're spending a little bit more money on some of the audio stuff to kind of get it to where we don't just fall off the cliff once we go go back to being live and in person. So
Phil, what about you guys? How is it going to look different moving forward?
I mean, luckily, I think we had started to pivot even 4 years ago or so, and really investing in this area of doing a separate live stream audio, video, helping add value both in the online but also the live. But really, from a programming standpoint, we were programming for the people in the room with eyes towards knowing here's how this content, here's how the programming applies to an online person, but still gearing towards the person in the room. Obviously, now with it being all online, we've made a number of adjustments with how lighting feels, how the environment feels, how long things are, where certain segments are in the service. So one week we may start off with the offering at the end of the service. The next week we're going to start it with it. We're using pre-service time a lot to help people connect and start engaging on the chat and start connecting with them. So we're doing a number of things that I think are really going to help us in the future, even to know how we can continue to be more effective at that. So I think that's helped. But I would say the biggest area where it's impacted us has been our length of time. We've probably gone from 4 songs each week to 3, or 2 to 3 even. We've taken messages from 35 to 25. We've mixed up, again, who's doing what and where they're doing that, just to keep people engaged and not feel like we're in a formula, which has always been a value of ours. But I think especially online, there's just certain things that we don't have to, there's barriers that aren't there anymore, that we can work in. So yeah, I think in a lot of ways, we haven't had anybody commenting or asking, hey, I was really hoping for a longer message necessarily. But what we are getting is people just appreciating that we see them and care for them in that way. And I think, just to circle back to even what Dan, right, was saying. Yeah, I think it's, I've talked to a lot of creatives right now that in this season that are kind of in a "I told you so" mindset of like, pastors, come on, I told you this is important. That's not going to get you anywhere. And this is more than ever before the time to look at your senior pastor in the eye on a Zoom call or in person if you can, and say, I've got your back, and how can I support you? Because pastors are dealing with a weight that we can't understand, and creatives are dealing with a weight that sometimes pastors can't understand. And that there's no, that living in that misunderstood feeling is going to be something we all have to understand and know that that's just reality. Because a comm director is never going to say, oh yeah, everybody just knows what I do every day. The same way that a senior pastor feels that way. My dad's a senior pastor, was a retired senior pastor. I watched behind the scenes a weight that was on him, on his shoulders, that the average person in our church would never know. So for us, more than anything, I hope and pray that we'll walk out of this season with people collaborating and leaning on each other more than ever before, and saying, I've got your back. How can I help you? And knowing that you can help, knowing that you know some things and have been given some resources and God-given gifts that will help the mission of the church. But we're not going to do that in spite of our senior leaders. We're going to do it because of our posture of saying, how can I help? How can I have your back? And that's where we're going to see some really cool things happen. Because it's going to take that when you talk about saying, hey, here's an idea for how we can change programming. If you just go to your senior pastor and say, hey, I'm learning these things from these webinars or calls, and say, I think we should change this to our programming, that's not going to be the right posture, because they're going to be, might be defensive around saying, are you saying what we're doing isn't good? What you can do is say, hey, I'm learning some things. Is there a chance for us to be able to chat about that and just let me show you some things that I'm finding? Here's some research. Here's some examples. Does this resonate with you? How can I talk through this in a way that will like, here's how I can have your back through this. Here's how I can help. So our posture matters so much as we even talk about leading through change, because we're going to need that now, but we're definitely going to need that into the future.
Good word, man. Good word. Um, you spoke to kind of reducing your worship set. DeAndre, is this something that you guys have done? Have you decreased the amount of songs in your sets?
We Yes, we've actually per weekend, like this weekend we did 2. So we've been very conscientious to how many songs we're doing, how we're introducing songs, and found that to be um, very interesting, So my pastor, he likes to keep things. Um, he is himself and I am me. And so we're just, as we walk through this, we continue to learn. He's kind of in a segment that he's kind of wanted to do that I've been like, I don't know if it's going to work, but supporting it. So yesterday we started a series called TGN, the good news. And so it was just kind of sharing what we've heard come out of COVID for our church. So it was really good yesterday. But yeah, definitely reducing what we're doing, how we're doing it, trying to restructure some things to keep people's engagement level has been, you can do that, normally where he's like, we need to keep things pretty consistent. You can do that in an online platform because it leaves people wondering what's coming up next, or I don't want to miss something versus I know at 9:05 they're doing this exact thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Good. Phil, I know that I've quoted you in the past of your stats on how regular an attendee is, and feel free to correct me. But I think it's like 0 to 2 per month would be somebody considers them a regular. They consider themselves a regular attender, right?
Yeah, I mean, what I put in my book, and that was from analyzing just our past number of years at Westridge, but also talking to other leaders at other churches, is what looked like a regular attender used to look like once every 2 to 3 weeks. Now that's more once every 6 to 8 weeks. And so overall, we know in person we may have 8 to 10 times a year to actually connect with that person in person. So yeah, it's startling how much that's changed.
So would you consider, and I know when this first thing started, a lot of pastors were seeing the massive hike in their attendance. I think some of that waned. I think that comes from two things. I think we talked a little bit about this last week or week before, is that maybe, churches are starting to reopen their building, so, or do a drive up church kind of situation, and then some screen fatigue a little bit. So I think some attendance is dipping a little bit, but senior pastors or churches in general saw a big spike in attendance when this first thing started. Do you kind of equate that with, maybe the regular attender that's only coming once every 6 weeks? You're getting everybody that all attendees coming online every week. Do you equate that together?
Yeah, I think so. I think at the same time too, when I would say late March, early April, for the most part, for most parts of the country, that was a time when fear was at its highest, when things felt the most out of control. And I think we found with any tragedy, in our country and beyond, I mean, people they go back home, they go back to they want to look to the church and say, how can you help lead us through? They're looking for hope. So I think we definitely saw a peak in that. I think we saw a lot of people looking through the doors and checking things out that haven't been around in a long time, and making that Sunday more of a priority for them, and also a lot of people had less going on in their lives, and that were taking them away from the church and had a time to actually connect in that way. So I think we're seeing that curve for the most part. A friend of Jay Granda from Saddleback, a friend of mine, he was saying the same thing. Like they're seeing the curve, and it's no reason to freak out. I think it's another reason to double down and say there's whether you have 2 people or 10 people or 10,000 people, there's still people that need the hope and message of Jesus each week. So I don't see Jesus talking to people differently depending on the crowd. When we study the Gospels, he was just faithful to his message and his calling, and we got to do the same. What regardless of how many people are on a stream, but we also have to be faithful to know. I was just talking to our pastor this past week. He's like, I'm sick of talking to an empty room, and I think all of us are at some level for doing church the way we're doing. But what's helped us as a team, our mission has always been to put Jesus on display. But when we do a Sunday, we don't get the energy of the room. But what we're trying to do is we're just trying to do our services and everything we're doing for a message of one, and we're just trying to picture Jesus in the middle of that room. And so we're preaching to him, we're worshiping him, we're doing that. So all of that, it's not a reason to freak out about the numbers, whether for how many people, how often people are attending physically or how often they're engaging digitally. It's just another reason to double down and keep on mission for why we're doing what we're doing.
Aaron, what about you guys? How's attendance?
Yeah, we've seen that same thing. We actually have like a working Google sheet that we kind of use to kind of keep track of different platforms and engagement, just so it's all in one place. And we've seen that same thing. We were really, really high. I mean, I think like the first week we were pretty close to 2,000 people watching online. And then I think this past week we were at 863, which is more real to our actual church size. But it's just crazy. It's just been kind of a slow, kind of nice and steady. And I think some of that is people are figuring out, like at first, the first week we heard a lot of people were, oh yeah, son's in his room watching it on his phone and we're over here watching it over here. And then, everyone's watching in different places, but we've started seeing, especially even more from social posts and stuff, like, hey, we're actually sitting down as a whole family and watching it in the living room. So I think it's a little bit of what Phil was saying, but I think it's also logistics too, of like, oh, hey, we're actually going to do church together, not in separate rooms and stuff. So I think it's a little bit of both for sure. Yeah. But we've seen that same trend.
Cool. Well, in our last few minutes together, Phil, I'd love to ask you the role of, and you put this in your book a lot, that communications is a ministry. So maybe speak to that, how our communication strategy and what we communicate to our church is a ministry for not just the comm guy, but all staff and volunteers.
I mean, I think when we think about the typical model of what churches typically looked at communications as, we think of it as the way that the bulletin happened, the way that things get up on the website. We think of it as secondary to a ministry, because the ministry has to have communications to be able to do what they do. But it's kind of like a necessary evil in some ways. Like, okay, yeah, I know I've got to have them do that to get to where it needs to go. That kind of model in the future church and the present church will not help us accomplish the mission of what we've got, because we have digital missionaries like that are on this call, and so many out there that have the ability to use a tool like Facebook or use Instagram or Twitter or use live streams, use those things not as just a way to broadcast more things, but actually to help accomplish the ministry and mission of your church. And to do that, to accomplish that, we need to actually lift up the role and the ministry of communication and the leaders behind that to be able to actually help partner with these other ministries. So if I'm working with our kids ministry, I'm not their marketing team. Our creative team isn't their marketing team just to make things look better. Our ministry is to actually use the gifts and talents that God's given us to be a megaphone behind that message and help enhance and support it. And it's going to take us leaning into it each other as co-equals in that way, because we can do some things that they can't do, but they can do some things that we can't do. The same way with a senior pastor, it's not our job to control his message. It's our job to enhance it and to magnify it. The same way we see Aaron doing that with Moses. Moses had the message, but Aaron had the megaphone. And then you look even further into Exodus, you see how Bezalel, and I think it's Exodus 31, God's equipped so many artists and leaders with a mission and a plan and a purpose to use for the mission of Jesus. And so that's where we don't want to unintentionally diminish somebody's role just because it looks different than traditional ministry. The role that we have now is we've got to magnify that to know that if we need digital missionaries that are using these new tools in innovative, creative ways, but we're never going to do that if we just tell them, hey, here's what we want you to do, how we want you to do it. Here's the color. Here's the way to do it. Like, that's not going to be lifting them up as ministry. That's just treating it like a 15-minute oil change and just expecting them to do it the way that we've always done it.
Good. Well, thank you, man. Thank you for that, and thank you, Aaron, for hanging out. Both of you guys are killing it, and I learned a lot in this call, and so thanks for your time, guys.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody else for joining us. We're gonna wrap up today. Hey, Dan, senior pastor, would you mind? Would you pray us out today?
Have prayers will travel. Yeah, let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for all of the ministries and churches and individuals and families that are represented on this screen. God, just thank you for the abilities and the creatives, and God, just for all of the things that you have granted us with. And Father, we are thankful for those gifts, but we don't take them lightly. God, you have gifted your church for such a time as this, and so God, we're grateful. We're grateful that you have allowed this season to maybe show some gifts and abilities that we didn't know we had, or we didn't know were on our staff or in our churches. And so, God, I just pray that you will continue to mold us and make us into your image. God, allow us to be more effective in the way that we minister to our communities because of conversations like this. Father, I thank you for Carl and for his company, and God, just for the ministry that they are to so many of us. And God, I just pray that you will continue to bless all of the different ministries that are represented here. Thank you, God, for this discussion. And God, we just pray that your direction and your guidance, your wisdom would be our focus during these days. God, bring us back, and bring us back not the same, but stronger than the way we might have left our buildings. God, we love you, and we thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. We love you guys. Thanks for hanging out. You guys have a great day and a great week.